free from these allies, the US will show more strong influence for only for the United States. Something such kind of image itself is exists in the President Trump, I think. So that's why that kind of remark has happened. So that's why every time President Trump asks the allies and partner what is the benefit of the United States. For example, when U.S. support Ukraine, recently the Ukraine agree with the United States to share the rare earth resources in their country. Why? Because this rare earth is a persuasive fact, persuasive card to if the U.S. can get the right to use these rare earths in Ukraine, the supporting Ukraine in the war against Russia is beneficial for the United States. Such kind of the logic is exist. So now, in case of NATO, if U.S. supports European countries, European must contribute to the United States if the troops sent to the U.S. military operation. But in this case, U.S. can do themselves, so that is not a contribution. Contribution is more something more bigger one the U.S. need.
Okay.
So something such kind of logic is exist in the President Trump side, I guess.
Yes, Dr. Nagal, do stay with us as we move on to our next story. And we turn to Europe's east. And in response to Russia's ongoing attacks on Ukraine's energy infrastructure, Poland is sending hundreds of generators to help the Ukrainian people survive the harsh winter. The assault on Ukraine's power and water systems have caused prolonged outages, leaving citizens in Kyiv without heat or electricity in temperatures as low as minus 20 degrees Celsius. Poland's Prime Minister Donald Tusk ordered the delivery of 397 power generators and 18 heaters to Ukraine. Additionally, 447 generators funded by the European Union will also be sent. The Polish capital Warsaw is contributing 90 generators to Kyiv's efforts to cope with the crisis, and the Polish public have raised over $1.62 million for the purchase of these generators, which fundraisers describe the effort as a vital chance for Ukrainians to survive the winter. Poland has remained a steadfast ally of Ukraine, and its support is seen as a crucial gesture amid the continued Russian aggression. Gilbert Doctorow joins us now. He's an international affairs expert. Okay, of course, this comes amid ongoing barrages from both sides, cross-border aerial attacks from both Ukrainian and Russian artillery. However, it is indeed affecting the Ukrainian population, and particularly throughout the likes of Kyiv and Kharkiv, the built-up cities, and affecting their livelihoods during winter, where they face temperatures of minus 20 as winter takes hold on Eastern Europe. This comes as we are now entering 1 month until the war's 4-year anniversary. This conflict has gone on for 4 years as talks continue to put an end to it. Today, even, the first trilateral talks of the conflict are taking place in Abu Dhabi, with territory being the key aspect of discussion when it comes to them. Of course, this is a huge development coming out of the Middle East today, as Ukrainian and Russian and United States delegations arrive in the capital of the United Arab Emirates. However, in Europe's east, the winter is cold and days are very short. The Ukrainian population in particular suffering, with hundreds of thousands of households without power or cold water during this hard time as Russia continues to strike critical energy infrastructure inside Ukraine. These public donations for aid will be seen to make some difference, with hundreds of generators being donated by the likes of Poland and the European Union and others. Okay, we are moving on now to our next story. And a training centre in the occupied West Bank faces imminent closure due to an Israeli land expropriation threat, according to UNRWA. The Kalandia Training Centre, which provides vocational education to 350 Palestinian students, could shut down within days. However, this would deprive these students of vital skills and economic opportunities. Israel has also accused UNRWA of links to Hamas, which the agency denies. Recent demolitions by Israeli authorities at UNRWA sites and threats to cut essential services have raised concerns. UNRWA urges the international community to act as education rights are at risk. Joining us now is Dr. Satoru Nagao once again to discuss this. Dr. Nagao, of course, Israel launched a lot of allegations at UNRWA as an agency. However, a school now being shut down in the occupied West Bank. This comes as East Jerusalem continues to be even demolished in some parts as Israel continues encroachment into the Palestinian territory and further diminishing the idea of a Palestinian state. What more can you tell us about this situation in the occupied West Bank?
Along with the Gaza, in the West Bank, there are some clashes between Israel and Palestinian government. So that's why now the Gaza is stable, but still the West Bank there are some clashes as continued. So that's why if Israel decide to crack down this kind of activities, of course it could happen. And but at the same time, during the ceasefire continuing the Gaza, the United States intervened the situation in this place, and they want to be the calm. The situation should be they're thinking. But at the same time, in the local area, there's some conflict between the two sides crossing in some area. That is true. So that's why built from the reality that is not easy to calming down.
Yes, indeed. And Dr. Nagao, of course, Israeli forces and settlements continue their occupation in the Palestinian territory. These settlements, of course, seen as illegal under international law. Why do they continue to push further into the territory, of course, despite the likes of the United Nations condemning the actions?
Indeed, in this case, it is not easy to decide by the international law because both sides feel the national security threat. In this case, most important feeling of this issue is minority or majority. View from Israel and West Bank, in this case, Israel is majority and West Bank is minority, it looks like. But view from the Israel in the Middle East, most of the population are Muslim, and the Israel side is also minority. If both sides feel they are minority, they are feeling there's a possibility the majority will kill them all, all the minorities. So that's why they fear always. And the fear creates an aggressive attitude towards the majority. So that's why every time such kind of situation, Israel do not think that they can live in peace. And Palestine also thinks that they cannot live in peace, and both sides choose the fight, and the clash has continued for a long time. But that is maybe strategic situation of this region. And if the third party like United States or United Nations or other countries try to intervene to calm down the situation, but most of the suggestion is not persuasive because their fear is too strong.
Yes, Dr. Nagao, do stay with us as we move on over to our next story. And the UN rights chief, Volker Turk, has expressed shock at the now routine abuse of migrants by US authorities urging Washington to end practices that tear families apart. Turk condemned the dehumanizing portrayal of migrants and refugees, calling on the US to respect human dignity and due process. He specifically criticized large-scale immigration enforcement operations, including the use of excessive force and arbitrary detentions. Turk warned that these policies risk severe harm to children and families, emphasizing the need for a humane approach to migration. Dr. Nagao, of course, this follows a ICE raid today, which saw a child as young as 5 detained by immigration enforcement officers in Minneapolis. What are the style of tactics that these ICE agents use, which the human rights chief Volker Turk is evading to?
Especially in the Democrat-led government stage, the President Trump try to appeal their strong stance towards illegal immigrants. So that is appealing point for the supporter of the President Trump. So that's why this kind of action itself is indeed a very exploitable situation for the President Trump to win the next midterm election. And in case of the United States, especially the right-wing or the Republican supporters, indeed, President Trump's policy towards the illegal immigrant is indeed relatively popular. So strong support they can get. So now the President Trump want to appeal because the midterm election is coming this year. So this appealing attitude itself is a little bit political advertisement. And at the same time, it is also true that for a long time, Democrat-led government accept illegal immigrants as the main working people which support the economy. And despite this is illegal. So legal issue or illegal issue, Democrat-led government hasn't committed so well for a long time. That is the reason such kind of the situation has created, and Republican side supporters dislike this situation very much. Then they say this is illegal. That's why the legal authorities should crack down. But that is the logic the Republican side can say. So that's why just before the midterm elections, both sides clash is escalating.
Yes, Dr. Satoru Nagao, thank you very much for joining us here on NewsX World. It's always a pleasure to speak to you. We now move on, and the United Kingdom's communications regulator, Ofcom, has opened an investigation into Meta platforms over its handling of WhatsApp data. The inquiry focuses on the accuracy and completeness of information Meta provided during a market review of bulk SMS messages. However, Ofcom raised concerns last year, suggesting that Meta's response might have been incomplete or inaccurate. Meanwhile, Meta has stated that it takes its regulatory obligations very seriously and has dedicated significant resources to responding. Furthermore, the company confirmed it will fully cooperate with Ofcom's investigation, and we'll bring you more on that as soon as we get it. Well, that's all that we have time for this hour. Keep watching NewsX World for more international news updates.
In the midst of this, life persists. in the midst of untruth, truth persists.
Hello and welcome. I'm Kriti Mehta. You're watching the World Report on NewsX World. Let's take a look at the top headlines. Denmark says talks with the United States on Greenland security will start soon, focusing on Arctic defense. Donald Trump claims a NATO-backed framework for US access, easing tariff tension and ruling out force. Ukraine, Russia and the United States are to hold their first trilateral talks to end the war. President Zelensky says the meetings take place in Abu Dhabi on Friday and Saturday. Donald Trump withdraws an invitation for Canada to join his Board of Peace initiative. The move follows Mark Carney's World Economic Forum speech and is framed as a direct response. Minnesota groups plan a statewide walkout Friday to protest immigration enforcement despite dangerous cold. The protest follows ICE detaining a 5-year-old boy during an operation that targeted his father in Minneapolis. Japan's Prime Minister Sanae Takaichi dissolves parliament ahead of a snap election set for February 8. She seeks fresh mandate to tackle rising living costs and boost defense spending as polls favor her cabinet. Venezuela's parliament gives initial approval to a bill that would open the country's oil sector to private investors, marking a dramatic shift away from decades of state control. TikTok says it reached a deal allowing the app to keep operating in the United States. The move ends a long security dispute and averts a ban after enforcement was repeatedly delayed. Campaigning begins in Bangladesh ahead of national elections set for February 12, the first since the 2024 uprising. The interim government pledges a free vote as 350 lawmakers are elected in what observers call a landmark poll. All right, viewers, on to the top focus story on Greenland. Now, Danish Prime Minister Mette Frederiksen is set to travel to Greenland's capital, Nuuk, for discussions with her counterpart. This follows US President Donald Trump's decision to back down from his threats to seize the island without force. Frederiksen earlier met with NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte in Brussels, where they discussed security concerns in the Arctic. Rutte and Frederiksen also agreed to work together to strengthen NATO's presence in the Arctic. They have stressed enhancing defense capabilities to ensure regional security, especially after Trump's change of stance. Moreover, Danish Foreign Minister Lars Løkke Rasmussen has also confirmed that negotiations with the US on Arctic security would soon begin. He said that the focus would be entirely on security, noting that further details would be kept private to reduce any speculation surrounding the talks. Dr. Asta Chadha, Associate Professor of International Relations at Ritsu Mikan University from Kyoto, joins us in this discussion. Thank you, Dr. Chadha, for joining me. Firstly, what does it mean that they want to keep the talks private, especially when Greenland is now a global talking point?
I mean, we need to understand that ever since President Trump expressed his wish to, in some way, control Greenland, it had sent ripples across the European Union. It had also sent a warning signal to US partners and allies across the Indo-Pacific and in Europe as to how reliable is United States if it does have those expansionist ambitions. And and then we saw President Trump backing down on the tariffs and saying that he would probably not use force. But that does not mean he has completely backed out of his ambitions, which are in some way to ensure that Greenland does remain in some sort of control, though we don't know what is the nature of that control. Is he seeking economic control? Is he seeking military control? Is he seeking just territorial access to key sea routes and shipping lanes? We don't know as of yet. It looks like as a result of the impact on the global markets, whether it's economic markets, whether it's financial markets, probably the administration felt it best be done through negotiation, because anyway, it is not worth severing ties with the US's long-standing allies in Europe. So I mean, that's how the whole world seems to be, interpreting it. Even though this has become a talking point, there probably would be some sort of development, because President Trump has not yet announced that he has given up that hope. We can only hope that at least Greenland gets to keep its sovereignty.
Contrary to giving up talks, he's in fact gone on to say that he already has full access to Greenland, and this was right after his talks with Mark Rutte. So how does Trump already has, have this access without any negotiation taking place, without any deal that the world really knows details about? Is there a chance that details are going to be made public for everybody to know?
Of course, I mean, if President Trump is to be believed, this was his decision to say it out in public, also as a response to everybody questioning him. But if you read what the NATO chief had earlier mentioned and what the words that are coming out of Denmark, they are entirely different. Greenland and Denmark say that there have been no talks that have taken place, and NATO head has stated that the negotiations are still underway, but it would not hurt Greenland's security or sovereignty in any way. So we need to, again, like I said, President Trump can probably be believed on the fact that, he wants those negotiations to take place. But I would interpret his words more as his ambition and his objective rather than an actual fact.
All right, sure. And how do you view the fact that Europe still seems very upset with the US? It has not taken back the US-European Union trade freeze, even though Trump has withdrawn the tariff threat.
I mean, of course, we need to look at it as a wider shock that was sent into the global international order when a big hegemon like United States talks of seizing territory or imposing tariffs. These are very coercive measures, if not direct threats. So, given, I do not think that rupture that has been made in some way in trust, at least between Europe and its Euro-Atlantic partners, I do not think it's going to mend that easy. On the other hand, what I do see is that Europe is going to go towards the rest of the Indo-Pacific and seek partners, and we saw that Europeans are very interested in establishing better trade deals with countries like India, because they are seeking alternative partnerships. Similar views we'll see coming out of Canada as well.
All right, sure. Dr. Chadha, do continue to stay on with me as we move on. Viewers, let's also tell you that Spain has decided not to participate in the Board of Peace initiative launched by US President. Spanish Prime Minister Pedro Sánchez confirmed the decision, stating that it aligns with Spain's belief in multilateralism and the United Nations system.
Tras haberlo consultado con muchos de los países, tras haberlo meditado durante bastantes semanas, hoy he querido trasladar a los colegas del Consejo Europeo el que el Gobierno de España ha decidido no participar a la llamada Junta de Paz. Agradecemos la invitación, pero declinamos el participar en esa junta propuesta por la administración estadounidense. Esta junta está fuera del marco de Naciones Unidas y, por cierto, no ha incluido a la autoridad palestina. El futuro de Gaza y también de Cisjordania, no nos olvidemos, el futuro en su conjunto de Palestina debe dirimirlo los palestinos. Y también el futuro de su coexistencia pacífica y segura con Israel deben dirimirlo fundamentalmente Israel y Palestina en un proceso dialogado que implemente la solución de los dos estados.
Notably, many allies, including Canada, Britain and most European Union countries, were also absent from the launch, which took place at the World Economic Forum in Davos. All right, I request Dr. Chadha to join me back in the discussion here. Dr. Chadha, clearly, once again, like most other Western European allies or the traditional Western European allies now of the United States, Spain has also picked up this stance of not joining the Board of Peace. Now, many are concerned about the fact that this board is probably going to challenge the United States, the United Nations. But do you think that's really going to be the case going forward, with only 35 countries having committed to this board?
Right. I mean, on the one hand, I do not see that ever being that big of a challenge, just by, if you look at it by size, because most of US's own traditional partners and allies, I mean, Canada is not on board, European Union is not on board. Other countries are either thinking about it or probably already planning to abandon the plan altogether, because this is very concentrated in terms of, the leadership and the structures, the fact that there's a membership fee that each of these countries need to pay. It is a limited time membership of 3 years or so. So, I mean, most of the details seem to be a bit vague about it. I do not see that ever, in its current form being able to parallel the United Nations. But what definitely is important, and I think that is one of the fundamental reasons why US's own allies are abandoning it in this initiative, is that more than a US hegemonic institution, it reads like President Trump's own hegemonic institution, or an alternative to the world order that as he sees it. This today it's for Gaza, tomorrow it could be for yet another conflicted region, and then it puts a very wrong precedence, just like in this case, wherein the country or the state or the area or geography in concern or in question is not represented at all. And it's everyone else that's on the table that's making decisions for it. I mean, that really rolls back the whole idea of multilateralism and United Nations, no matter how defunct that organization might be. Yet it does represent something wherein each country has a certain voice, and those voices seem to have either not been represented on the Board of Peace. The other question that arises is what peace are these countries seeking for a third group or a third geography that they're intervening in? What knowledge do they have, and how would the power structure work within it? I mean, UN on the other hand does have a kind of a decided, controversial, not acceptable, badly done, but there is a power structure. In case of Board of Peace, it still remains elusive. I mean, what are the details of this and how is it going to function? Because there is not much detail, it is difficult to see how this could actually parallel United Nations. But just the fact that most of US allies are abandoning it does signal that there is a loss of trust at a global level with regard to US-based proposals and its leadership and its hegemonic leadership, I would say, on such a proposed organization that it's trying to table.
And Dr. Chadha, how do you see the fact that now the peace in Gaza is mostly going to be decided by what the United States and its so-called allies in the Board of Peace want, and no other permanent member of the UN Security Council or the other superpowers in the world will really have a say on this? No voice from Global South in this Board of Peace.
Correct. I mean, it would have looked better had this Board of Peace actually had representation of a lot of other nations that matter, not just US allies. I mean, I would say for that matter, the upcoming middle powers in the country, there's Japan, there's Australia, there's India, there's South Korea. Those countries cannot be avoided when we're talking about world peace. They're very inherent to the global order. On the other hand, let's be realistic here. How much really have any other voices mattered to the extent that United States voice has mattered, specifically when it comes to these conflicts that have erupted over the years in the Middle East? So US has already maintained its hegemony. This should then be seen as yet another project to maintain and propel that same hegemony. And probably that is the reason why we see a lot of partners, not just from within the Americas, but also Europe, abandoning the initiative. And most of the other countries that are currently represented seem to be the ones that probably, I mean, they might have a regional representation, but they don't seem to have a very balanced view with regard to how this Board of Peace could actually lead to peace in the region.
Right. Dr. Chadha, thanks then very much for joining me in this discussion. It was a pleasure to speak with you. Moving ahead now, viewers, we're going to cover news from South Asia. Now, the Indian rupee has fallen to a new all-time low of 91.77 against the US dollar on Friday, surpassing the previous record of 91.7425 set earlier this week. The rupee dropped by about 0.2% as demand for the dollar from businesses and importers outpaced the rupee's earlier movements, adding more pressure. Several factors are at play, including a stronger US dollar and rising US interest rates, which make dollar investments more attractive. Additionally, India's increasing trade deficit with more imports than exports and foreign investment outflows are putting extra strain on the rupee. These challenges are compounded by uncertainty around trade deals between India and the US despite India's strong economic growth. I request Madhav Nalapat, editorial director of the Sunday Guardian, joining me in this discussion from New Delhi. Thank you very much, Mr. Nalapat, for joining me in this discussion. Firstly, how do you view this fall of the rupee? Especially what's noticeable is in the recent few years, the fall has been rather steep than in probably say a decade ago.
Look, this is a very serious matter because we are uncomfortably close to the 100 rupee mark, and quite frankly, when the rupee falls that low, then I think we are in serious trouble because the stage may come when it enters a free fall, and then it's 200, 300, 400 per US dollar. That's a very dangerous stage to get because the public is going to be very, very upset. And, you've seen from Nepal and Bangladesh and Sri Lanka what happened when the public gets upset. Frankly, I think it's high time the Reserve Bank of India acted to ensure that this kind of a fall is stopped and is in fact reversed. And one of the main problems is very heavy imports from China. The imports from China are surging, despite the fact the Chinese are helping Pakistan. They are openly helping Pakistan, and they are not friends of ours. They are not friendly neighbors. They're hostile neighbors. At the same time, we are buying record numbers of items from them and paying for all of that in US dollars. So we should insist to the Chinese that we can pay in rupees, and and if you like, we have to pay in rupees. We cannot pay in the US dollar because with this kind of surging trade, they want that kind of high trade. So to keep that high trade, they'll have to allow that they allow payment in rupees, so that they'll also buy from us. This deficit cannot be sustained. The deficit that we have with China cannot be sustained, and this fall in rupee is uncomfortably close to 100 rupee per dollar mark. And if that happens, I can tell you, it's a very dangerous situation, and it's a very volatile situation. So I hope that quick action is taken by the Reserve Bank of India in this matter.
What do you think, Mr. Nalapat, really needs to be done, especially to assuage the investors, as equity sell-off is now adding to the extra strain?
Well, the fact of the matter is the US under Donald Trump is getting highly unpredictable, and that's a major problem. For 25 years, India was an ally of the United States. President Trump is not treating allies as allies. He's going after the European Union. He backtracked a bit on Greenland, but only a bit. And heaven knows when he's going to come back up and say, yes, Greenland belongs to me, or I'm going to take it. So the reality is Trump is an X factor. Nobody knows what he's going to do. And we have to learn to live with that and live with that X factor.
All right, Dr. Nalapat, thanks for your comments. I requested to stay on with us as we now move on. Viewers, the United States is also officially now withdrawn from the World Health Organization, fueling a promise that Donald Trump had made. This exit comes amid a hefty unpaid bill, with the US owing around $278 million in assessed contributions, as well as several $100 million in voluntary contributions for 2024 and 25. Despite the ongoing financial obligations, the US has made it clear that no payments will be made before the withdrawal takes effect. The WHO, which has voiced concerns over the US departure, warns that global health security will suffer without the US partnership. Request Mr. Nalapat to join me back in the discussion here. Mr. Nalapat, what's really going to happen, and who's really going to pay this heavy debt that's now left behind?
Look, Trump is quite ready to walk away from the WHO. He doesn't care two hoots about WHO or any international organization, including the United Nations organization. The fact is, Trump has trampled on these organizations, and he has basically ensured de facto that the US is withdrawing from all of them. So I'm not surprised that he has gone from WHO. I don't see any chance of him agreeing to pay any of that money back, and it's going to be a huge deficit, which will affect the work of WHO, which so many countries have been funding, including Europe, including India. But the reality of the situation is Trump couldn't care two hoots about Europe, he couldn't care two hoots about the WHO, and as a consequence, in my view, he is just going to walk away from it. He's going to walk away from his debts because he doesn't bother. And may I point out, in his business career, there have been many bankruptcies, many bankruptcies. He has walked away from huge obligations, filed under the relevant chapter of US law, gone into bankruptcy, and finally creditors have to settle for only 10 or 20% if they're lucky on each dollar. Now administrative history. Thank you.
But Mr. Nalapit, the burden of the financial debt that US has left behind is now going to fall on the other contributors that still remain a part of it, and many nations, especially from Africa or the global south, are not in a position to finance those these debts, and they are also the countries who need the World Health Organization the most.
Look, the fact of the matter is that WHO is going to live with Donald Trump. And I frankly don't understand why so many international organizations are based in all places. In Switzerland, one of the most expensive countries in the world. I'm sure they can get alternative accommodation in India or Africa or some such place, which will be much cheaper. The reality is that the WHO, for example, the salaries are huge, absolutely huge. And the reality is a certain amount of trimming will now have to take place. And among that trimmings may probably be, I would say, a good idea, selling the WHO assets in Switzerland and moving it away to some other country, a country which is much cheaper. So I think the WHO will again have to live with this deficit and to survive this deficit and to work out methods of that, because that is going to be the future. There's not going to be any change in that. I don't think any politician in the US is going to once again pay the WHO anything. The people, the voters in the United States will not have it. Ultimately, they'll be joined by voters in Europe also, who are becoming very skeptical, for example, of the cost of the Ukraine war. So in my personal view, WHO should make some painful adjustments. They should look at their own salary bills, and they should look at their location, and they should make changes in both. Thank you.
Right, one final question before I let you go, Mr. Nalapit. Given the fact that the US was the largest contributor, former largest contributor to the World Health Organization, do you think the organization will be able to survive? And if not, what is really then going to happen to the watchdog or the monitoring body in the face of several pandemics that we have seen come and go?
Look, Trump doesn't care two hoots for any international body. He doesn't recognize any of them. He cares two hoots for them, and he's effectively withdrawn America from all of them. There's no question about it. So what happens to them is they'll have to do some painful restructuring. Now, you know, for example, if a company goes into a serious financial problems, it goes into a painful reconstruction phase. That's what these international organizations will need to do, including the WHO. There's no way out, because Trump is not going to change his ways. Trump is not going to be persuaded to give that money over. It's all that can be done is for WHO to make structural changes to ensure that it runs a leaner and more effective, more cost-effective organization than now. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much, Mr. Nalapit, for joining me in this discussion. And moving ahead, yours. Now, a British court has allowed a legal challenge to move forward against a large data center project outside London. The 90 megawatt data center in Buckinghamshire was approved last year, but campaigners argue that the impact on climate change was not considered. The two groups challenging the project of Foxglove and Global Action Plan claim that the government has failed to assess the extra electricity needed to power and cool the center, especially as demand for data centers increases with the rise of generative AI. While the developers argue the project was properly approved, the court agreed with the campaigners, granting them permission to pursue the challenge in court. This could set a precedent as the first legal challenge against a hyperscale data center in the UK. A full hearing in the case is expected later this year. And viewers, that's all we have time for. Thank you for watching NewsX World. For all international news and updates.
What we can do as the Interparliamentary Union to strengthen democracy, to promote human rights, to ensure that humanitarian law is respected.
UN Security Council needs a makeover, a comprehensive reform, and India deserves a position there, a role there.
Prime Minister Modi during Operation Sindoor made it amply clear that war has never been India's choice. We are with the side of peace. We are neither neutral nor indifferent. We are with peace.
We would have dealt with US a whole lot on trade and those kinds of things, and that's not as certain these days. So we have to go back and look at our European partners, our Asian partners.
An opportunity to exchange, to have a dialogue, to have a debate on a different perspective on finding the solution of the conflict.
First thing that is important to have a common ground, and that we do have with humanitarian laws and human rights, but also to say, okay, what does it mean for us as a country to act on these laws and how can we work together?
When we realize that there's something wrong with democracy, the institutions and policies, values come together and we take stock, and it's possible then to improve and chart a new course for democracy.
It's the people's right to self-determination, and if they want to be independent, they should be independent. We will not start a war against Greenland.
In the midst of this, life persists. In the midst of untruth, truth persists.
What we can do as the Interparliamentary Union to strengthen democracy, to promote human rights, to ensure that humanitarian law is respected.
UN Security Council needs a makeover, a comprehensive reform, and India deserves a position there, a role there.
Prime Minister Modi during Operation Sindoor made it amply clear that war has never been India's choice. We are with the side of peace. We are neither neutral nor indifferent. We are with peace.
We would have dealt with US a whole lot on trade and those kinds of things, and that's not as certain these days. So we have to go back and look at our European partners, our Asian partners.
An opportunity to exchange, to have a dialogue, to have a debate on a different perspective on finding the solution of the conflict.
First thing that is important to have a common ground, and that we do have with humanitarian laws and human rights, but also to say, okay, what does it mean for us as a country to act on these laws and how can we work together?
When we realize that there's something wrong with democracy, the institutions and policies, values come together and we take stock, and it's possible then to improve and chart a new course for democracy.
It's the people's right to self-determination, and if they want to be independent, they should be independent. We will not start a war against Greenland.
In the midst of death, life persists. In the midst of untruth, truth persists.
What we can do as the Interparliamentary Union to strengthen democracy, to promote human rights, to ensure that humanitarian law is respected.
UN Security Council needs a makeover, a comprehensive reforms, and India deserves a position there, a role there.
Prime Minister Modi during Operation Sindoor made it amply clear that war has never been India's choice. We are with the side of peace. We are neither neutral nor indifferent. We are with peace.
We would have dealt with US a whole lot on trade and those kinds of things, and that's not as certain these days. So we have to go back and look at our European partners, our Asian partners.
An opportunity to exchange, to have a dialogue, to have a debate on a different perspective on finding the solution of the conflict.
First thing that is important to have a common ground, and that we do have with humanitarian laws and human rights, but also to say, okay, what does it mean for us as a country to act on these laws and how can we work together?
When we realize that there's something wrong with democracy, the institutions and policies, values come together and we take stock, and it's possible then to improve and chart a new course for democracy.
It's the people's right to self-determination, and if they want to be independent, they should be independent. We will not start a war against Greenland.
In the midst of death, life persists. In the midst of untruth, truth persists.
What we can do as the Interparliamentary Union to strengthen democracy, to promote human rights, to ensure that humanitarian law is respected.
UN Security Council needs a makeover, a comprehensive reforms, and India deserves a position there, a role there.
Prime Minister Modi during Operation Sindoor made it amply clear that war has never been India's choice. We are with the side of peace. We are neither neutral nor indifferent. We are with peace.
We would have dealt with US a whole lot on trade and those kinds of things, and that's not as certain these days. So we have to go back and look at our European partners, our Asian partners.
Hello and welcome. I'm Thomas Porteous and you're watching The World Report on NewsX World. Let's take a look at some of the top headlines this hour. Ukrainian and Russian negotiators begin 2 days of talks in the UAE with the status of Donetsk a key issue. Kyiv resists Russian demands to cede territory as US pressure grows to reach a deal to end the war. Denmark's Prime Minister says she agrees with NATO that Arctic security must be strengthened after US pressure over Greenland. Denmark and Greenland insist sovereignty is non-negotiable but remain open to broader talks. Britain says Donald Trump's comments playing down NATO's role in Afghanistan are deeply disappointing. Ministers stress European allies fought on the front lines and suffered heavy losses in US-led operations. An Iranian official warns that Iran may target US-linked investments in the region in retaliation for any attack on the Islamic Republic. The Kremlin says Ukraine must withdraw its forces from the Donbass for any deal to end the war, and the demand is repeated ahead of trilateral talks with the US and Ukraine in Abu Dhabi. Minnesota groups plan a statewide walkout to protest immigration enforcement despite dangerous cold. The protest follows ICE detaining a 5-year-old boy during an operation that targeted his father in Minneapolis. UN Human Rights Chief Volker Turk urges the US to uphold international law in immigration crackdowns in the United States, citing concerns over arbitrary and unlawful detentions. France's Prime Minister survives a no-confidence vote after forcing part of the 2026 budget through Parliament. The vote marks a symbolic win for the government, with further political challenges expected. We start off in Europe's east, and a fire has broken out at an oil depot in the Russian city of Penza following a Ukrainian drone strike. According to Oleg Milenchinchenko, governor of Penza, debris from a downed drone fell onto the depot's territory, igniting the blaze. Meanwhile, in Ukraine, state-owned grid operator Ukrenergo has announced that several power generation facilities are undergoing emergency repairs, causing a significant deterioration of the national energy situation. The grid operator noted that the situation worsened because several facilities were forced into emergency repairs simultaneously following recent missile and drone strikes by Russia. As the war escalates, both the countries are targeting energy facilities and infrastructure as winter storm continues. Joining us now is Alison Mutler. She is the former Associated Press bureau chief in Romania. She joins us live from Bucharest. Alison, thank you very much for joining us. Before we get on to the negotiations that are going on today, let's focus on, of course, the Ukrainian winter, which of course has been made a lot worse for the people of Ukraine, given Russia's energy strikes on Ukrainian energy facilities, leaving thousands of Ukrainians without power in the time that they need it the most, with temperatures sometimes going down to minus 20 degrees Celsius. How successful and what kind of an impact has Russia's strikes on this Ukrainian energy infrastructure been? And tell us about the effects that it has on the people of Ukraine.
Well, Russia has been relentless in previous weeks, and as you said, in the deep of winter when temperatures have plunged down to minus 20 at night and during the day about minus 8 in Kiev. And they have been relentless in targeting energy facilities, the energy grid, in a bid for ordinary Ukrainians to lose heat and to lose, hot water, and that the aim of that is to discourage Ukrainians, is to lessen morale. As tomorrow, I think, is the 5th year. We'll go into the 5th year of this war. It's a bitterly cold winter, and it's the Russian strategy is to question, make Ukrainians question their own leadership, and to make them miserable physically as well, because the Ukrainian people who are operators who are working around the clock trying to restore energy and heat. It must be in incredibly difficult conditions. And they have received help from the European Union with this as well. But they have been, as I said, relentless attacks by Russia on the Ukrainian energy facilities with the aim of hurting ordinary people. Now, Ukraine has also been targeting Russian energy power centers, like you mentioned, the one today in Penza, which is about 500 or so kilometers outside Ukraine. It's actually closer to Kazakhstan, I think, than Moscow. But the Ukrainians are targeting the Russian war effort. They're not targeting ordinary citizens. So that is the difference in the hostility, the weapons used on either side.
And Alison, is there any kind of violation when it comes to international law? Because targeting, of course, civilian infrastructure, not civilian infrastructure per se, but energy infrastructure, of course, during these winter months certainly does harm the civilian population in Ukraine. It could, of course, be deadly.
Oh, it is deadly. I'm sure, that people must have died. We're not necessarily having the deaths reported, perhaps elderly people, other people with some health conditions must have died, and it's against the way war is supposed, the way that war is conventionally fought. And also, we have to say, Kiev is not part of Russia's invasion plans. They were invading the East Ukraine, where there's a ethnic Russian population, whereas Kiev is the capital. But the idea is that Russia sees all of Ukraine as a legitimate target, and particularly striking Kiev is the capital, and that's where most of the people live. That's where the power center is, the administrative center. So it also sends a strong message that Russia is coming to get Ukrainians, and they're not distinguishing between fighting soldiers and ordinary civilians. And the idea is to make life as miserable as possible and reduce morale. But this is also accompanied by a misinformation campaign. Again, it's designed to make Ukrainians doubt their leadership, doubt the war, want it to be ended, think that it would be better if their country actually was taken over by Russia. That's been the aim, because Ukraine has stood up very strongly to Russia in the last 4 years. And, Russia is now making a very strong bid to dent Ukrainian support for the war, for defending their own country.
And Alison, of course, another huge development today. Diplomatic talks are set to begin, trilateral ones involving the United States, Russia and Ukraine in the United Arab Emirates. Of course, territory remains the most central issue to these talks. The Kremlin demanding the entirety of the Donbass before Ukraine even thinks about an end to the war. Are you optimistic about these first trilateral talks in Abu Dhabi over the next 2 days?
No, because Ukraine and Russia had reached, or some agreement had been reached, in the sense that Ukraine said that they had agreed with 90% of a peace plan, which we never really saw, that was brokered, I think, by Donald Trump. But it's the extra 10%, and the extra 10% is very important. It's about territory, and Ukraine is being asked to give territory that was never conquered by Russia. So again, of course, it is opposed to that, but Russia is also unyielding. Russia wants its maximalist demands to be met so that they can declare victory. So I don't see at this moment any headway being made on these negotiations. And I don't see how they can be made, particularly on the issue of territory. Other areas, other issues, other concessions perhaps have been made, as Zelensky said, that the Ukrainians had agreed to a lot of what was put on the table. But over territory, it'll be very difficult for Ukraine, particularly to concede areas it is so valiantly fought to defend, and in fact areas where the Russians haven't made any haven't captured.
Alison Mutler, thank you very much for your time. It's always a pleasure talking to you here on the programme. We now move over to the United States for our next story, and outrage over the detention of 5-year-old Liam Corgedo Ramos during a massive immigration crackdown in Minneapolis. The boy was detained by immigration and customs enforcement agents amid President Trump's push to deport illegal immigrants. Vice President J.D. Vance defended the actions of federal agents, saying they were protecting Ramos after his father allegedly fled during the operation. However, the detention has sparked international condemnation, with UN Rights Chief Volker Turk urging the US to stop dehumanizing migrants. Democratic figures, including Texas Congressman Joaquin Castro and former Vice President Kamala Harris, condemned the detention, accusing ICE of using children as pawns. Harris called the child's detention outrageous, while former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton criticized law enforcement for terrorizing communities. The case has added fuel to protests against ICE, with demonstrations expected in the city and calls for an economic blackout in response to the crackdown. Joining us now is Raymond Vickery. He's an international affairs expert and former US Assistant Secretary of Commerce. He joins us live from Washington, D.C. Raymond, thank you very much. It's always a pleasure to speak to you, and thank you for taking the time. These protests continue in Minneapolis, and of course, after the shooting of Renee Good, and after that incident where a protester was shot in the leg the other day, this is another escalation. A 5-year-old child was detained during an immigration operation. Before politics, before policy, how does the US government justify putting a child of 5 into custody at all?
Well, thanks, Thomas, for having me. Obviously, I think there really is not a justification. We have in the United States a situation in which President Trump is organizing ICE as a federal police force, and it is operating contrary to U.S. law. You know, democracy is not just about elections. It's about rule of law. It's about human rights. And this president seems willing to forego that bedrock of United States constitutional law, which has kept us going for some 250 years. And this incident with the 5-year-old child, I'm sorry to say, is not an isolated instance. The Washington Post is reporting this morning that 4 other children have been detained. So this is not something which is a one-off and a mistake, but is a calculated policy on behalf of the Trump administration. You may recall earlier during Trump 1.0, the administration at that time advocated separating parents from children at the border as a deterrent to parents for fear that they may lose their children. This is a somewhat similar kind of situation. It's cruel and unusual. And of course, the administrative warrants, which the administration says it justify this, are completely contrary to the 4th Amendment of the Constitution. So you see protests breaking out across the United States. I received a notice just a few minutes ago about one in a local neighborhood here in the Washington area. So it's a very, very difficult time. The courts are going to have to step in, and then Congress is going to have to step up to provide the checks and balances which are in the Constitution but are not being observed.
Raymond, do stay with us as we move on from the United States over to West Asia for our next story. And of course, Israel is reportedly planning to limit the number of Palestinians entering Gaza through the Rafah border crossing, which is set to reopen next week. According to reports, Israel aims to allow more Palestinians to leave than enter. However, the Rafah crossing, the main route for Gaza's 2 million residents, has been under Israeli control since 2024. Israel is also planning to establish a military checkpoint inside Gaza for security screening. The Palestinian Authority personnel and EU monitors will oversee the Rafah crossing. This comes as discussions continue over the implementation of President Trump's peace plan. Raymond joins us once again. Israel, of course, saying that Rafah will reopen, but limits on who can enter Gaza. Is this a humanitarian reopening or a controlled population management mechanism?
Well, I think, Thomas, it's very much a control mechanism. You know, President Trump has said that he has a peace plan and he's bringing peace to Gaza. Really, there has been, thankfully, a lessening of violence. But as you have seen, there continues to be unprovoked slaughter. 3 journalists were killed just the other day. And the problem here is that there is no strategy for waging peace. There is no partnership. Then there is no plan to change the orientation of Israel. Israel at this point is bound and determined really to, if not wipe out, at least lessen the population of Palestinians in Gaza. In the West Bank, we have seen the same sort of thing. So this is part of a calculated program, and until the international community is willing and able to provide some restraint, to step in with measures which will rein in Israel, I doubt very seriously that there will be a lasting peace. It is not a formula for a lasting peace in West Asia to say the Palestinians will all be taken out of Gaza and shipped somewhere else. Those on the West Bank will have to either submit or leave. That is a recipe for continued unrest, but unfortunately, that's the situation. At this point, the international community is in disarray, but there are great democracies like India, like United States, as in Europe, Japan, who do have influence over Israel and have the wherewithal to bring a true and lasting peace. But at this point, that's not happening.
Raymond, I was wondering if you caught Jared Kushner's speech at the Board of Peace Summit just yesterday, when it laid out these new plans for Gaza, which included a whole area for tourism and the entire Gaza Strip plan. He said this was in the best possible outcome. It was completely redone. I just wanted to get what you were thinking when you saw Jared Kushner present that map, given the current state of Gaza, and of course given the sheer loss of life that's happened there in recent times, the fact that they are planning these tourist this tourist area on Gaza's front beach. What are your thoughts on that?
My thoughts are that this is a reflection of Mr. Kushner's father-in-law's approach to international affairs. Namely, President Trump sees these matters as a real estate development opportunity. He does not have an understanding of human rights, of cultural protection, of the need to have a humane rule of law that will protect particularly the innocent. This is really a pipe dream. You have to have a strategy to wage peace. You have to have partners. You have to have wherewithal to do it. If you look at the so-called Board of Peace, it really is a top-down corporate, U.S. corporate style in which you have a chairman of the board at the top who basically has control of the situation and is able to have the transaction go forward in a way which benefits the corporation as determined by the chairman. This is not an inadequate, this is a totally inadequate way to proceed, to roll out pictures and maps that show things which are completely at variance with what people can see with their own eyes, the kind of destruction which is there now, and not really have any way to get from point A to point B, is just a part of the art of reality TV. It's not in accordance with anything which is real on the ground. So I think it's very disappointing, and we're at a crucial time in the international community, and we have to come together not only in regard to Gaza and Ukraine, but a restoration of some sort of process rather than just this real estate transactional approach to international relations.
Raymond, of course, as you know, Donald Trump is a master of overturning headlines, apart from when it comes to Jeffrey Epstein, of course. But of course, when Donald Trump initially made those comments, released that video of the so-called Riviera of the Middle East when it came to Gaza, people were, of course, outraged. That was, of course, when this conflict was still continuing and going on. He said the Palestinians wouldn't be able to come back. Now looking at this plan that Israel is reportedly planning to limit the number of Palestinians entering back into Gaza at the Rafah crossing, along with this Board of Peace plan, with Jared Kushner in front of that presentation with these extremely modern buildings in a place where currently there is nothing but rubble. Do you think that plan that Donald Trump previously had is merely coming into force now because it is easier since he has achieved peace?
Well, of course, he hasn't achieved peace, and this is really a part of his plan all along. And to say that there has been really some sort of breakthrough in solving the problem of the Palestinians of Gaza, the West Bank, that's not the case at all. President Trump is an expert at creating an alternative reality in the minds of his supporters, a reality which does not exist. And he proceeds along a pathway which he has predetermined is going to happen. This has been a great strength of his in terms of overcoming political difficulties in the United States. But for the international community, in the longer run, it's a pathway to disaster, because it's not dealing with real problems. It's not providing some sort of mechanism which is not dependent upon the will of one man. It is completely contrary to what history has shown us. If you look at the history of the 20th century, the idea of having one person in charge, whether it be in Germany or in Italy, that runs up against the reality and leads to further conflict. So I'm afraid this is a very dire situation, and you're quite right to point out that what has been announced with this so-called Board of Peace and the Kushner map and drawings is all of a piece of getting rid of the present inhabitants, moving them at best, and at worst, not allowing them to exist in order to be able to bring peace. But it is not going to bring peace. It'll bring further conflict. And it's up to the peace-loving nations of the world to be able to band together and find some sort more effective mechanism than presently exists.
Raymond Vickery, do stay with us as we move on once again. And the UN's Human Rights Council is convening for an emergency session to address Iran's violent crackdown on protesters in the recent wave of unrest. At the opening, the United Nations Rights Chief, Volker Turk, decries that thousands of people, including children, had died in Iran's crackdown on nationwide protests and has urged the authorities to end their brutal repression. Listen in to what Turk had to say.
Authorities to reconsider, to pull back and to end their brutal repression, including summary trials and disproportionate sentences. I call for the immediate release of all those arbitrarily detained by the Iranian authorities.
In a letter drafted by Iceland and presented to the Council, countries expressed a serious concern about the ongoing human rights situation in Iran. Members of the Council also expressed concern over arbitrary arrests, enforced disappearances and the communication blackout intentionally imposed by Iranian authorities. Raymond joins us once again to discuss this. The UN Human Rights Council is holding an emergency session. How serious does the situation have to be for the Council to convene at this level, and what does that signal about the activities that have gone on in Iran since the end of December?
Well, I think it signals that it's a very serious situation and one which it has not been ameliorated in any significant manner by the bluster of President Trump, that help was on the way, that he was going to take action to be able to stop the human rights abuses, to stop the killing and stop the execution. He found that his hyperbole was really not enforceable. He didn't have a strategy. He didn't have partners in regard to it, and he didn't have any principles. So the kind of one-off transaction of sending bombers, if you will, in to solve the problem on nuclear development, he thought would work in regard to the human rights situation in regard to Iran. When saner heads pointed out to him that this it was impossible, he simply declared victory and said that there weren't any human rights violations, or at least the killing had stopped. And what you see in this emergency session is those who have knowledge of what the actual situation is saying, well, the human rights violations have not stopped. The regime is still involving in repression, which is contrary to not only the rule of law, humanity, and the UN Charter, but the very basics of how people relate to each other in this world. So yes, the UN approach is an indication that the situation on the ground is once again very different than that which President Trump is trying to sell to the international community. We have to get back to some semblance of having a strategy, having partners, having long-term principles in order to deal with this problem. It is not going to go away. And it is not going to be better in the short run if you don't have a long-term approach, which at this point we don't have.
Raymond Vickery, as always, it's a pleasure to speak to you. Thank you very much for taking the time in joining us. We now move on and over to the African continent, and Uganda's military chief has confirmed the detention of 2,000 opposition supporters and the killing of 30 after a disputed presidential election. President Yoweri, who has ruled Uganda for nearly 40 years, claimed victory over opposition leader Bobi Wine, who rejected the results and went into hiding, alleging widespread irregularities. Meanwhile, the military has labelled the opposition as terrorists and vowed to capture remaining leaders. Furthermore, the government claims Wine supporters were violent, while the opposition have said that they were also attacked. UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres have expressed concern, urging respect for human rights and the rule of law as tensions rise. But that's all that we have time for. Keep watching NewsX World for more international news updates.
In the midst of death, life persists. In the midst of untruth, truth persists.
What we can do as the Interparliamentary Union to strengthen democracy, to promote human rights, to ensure that humanitarian law is respected.
UN Security Council needs a makeover, a comprehensive reform, and India deserves a position there, a role there.
Prime Minister Modi during Operation Sindoor made it amply clear that war has never been India's choice. We are with the side of peace. We are neither neutral nor indifferent. We are with peace.
We would have dealt with US a whole lot on trade and those kinds of things, and that's not as certain these days. So we have to go back and look at our European partners, our Asian partners.
An opportunity to exchange, to have a dialogue, to have a debate on a different perspective on finding the solution of the conflict.
First thing that is important to have a common ground, and that we do have with humanitarian laws and human rights, but also to say, okay, what does it mean for us as a country to act on these laws and how can we work together?
When we realize that there's something wrong with democracy, the institutions and policies, values come together and we take stock, and it's possible then to improve and chart a new course for democracy.
It's the people's right to self-determination, and if they want to be independent, they should be independent. We will not start a war against Greenland.
In the midst of death, life persists. In the midst of untruth, truth persists.
What we can do as the Interparliamentary Union to strengthen democracy, to promote human rights, to ensure that humanitarian law is respected.
UN Security Council needs a makeover, a comprehensive reform, and India deserves a position there, a role there.
Prime Minister Modi during Operation Sindoor made it amply clear that war has never been India's choice.
Welcome back to NewsX World. I'm Thomas Porteous and you're watching Focal Length, where we get you a briefing on topics from across the world. On the night of January the 3rd, explosions rocked parts of Caracas, the Venezuelan capital. Residents reported aircraft overhead, power disruptions and widespread panic as US forces carried out an operation that led to the capture of Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro. While Washington described the action as a practice of precise and lawful operations, Venezuelan authorities and local media called it an illegal abduction and a direct violation of national sovereignty. Since then, questions have mounted over leadership, legitimacy, oil politics, and whether Venezuela is now the latest front in a widening global power struggle. To discuss what really happened and what lies ahead for the country, we're now joined by Jesus Rodriguez Espinosa, a political and international affairs analyst, founder and editor of Orinoco Tribune, and a former diplomat. He is based in Caracas and he has reported extensively on Venezuelan politics, foreign intervention and media narratives from the global south. Thank you very much for joining us, Jesus. It's a pleasure to have you here on the program. Of course, on the night of January the 3rd, explosions were reported near Caracas as the US forces carried out this operation. Residents described aircraft overhead, power disruptions and panic in parts of the city. From your personal experience, what did that night actually sound and feel like, and how different was the reality from the precision operation narrative being sold abroad?
Yes, it's important to clarify that despite, Washington narratives about a surgical strike or something like that, the truth is that, the U.S. military apparatus put over Venezuela over 100 something aircrafts, send Delta forces to kill people in Caracas, and they bombed and fire upon several targets, not only in Caracas, but in other places of the country. They actually bombed the Puerto Tuna military complex in Caracas, where President Chavez was located. Also bombed La Carlota military base in Caracas and several other locations in Venezuela. In La Guaira state, they also bombed several places, including the warehouses where important medical material was being, safeguarded, and that created a big problem. And around all those places, there is a big civilian population that, as you said, went into panic. I live in the downtown Caracas, in the south downtown Caracas, and from where I live, we did not experience that level of, panic or fear, because we hear the explosions, we hear the aircraft, but we didn't saw it that close. So in that sense, what you say is true. I mean, there was panic in several places in Caracas, and there's also a psychological burden in many people. I have talked with many people that have lived around the, stroke areas, and they have some sort of psychological and, psychological impact. They are afraid, they are scared. And some people that live in, for example, in some areas of the Puerto Tuna military complex, they have decided not to go back there to their houses, to their homes, because of that panic. And it's important to say that so far, according to official figures, there were more than 100 people killed in those strikes. Among them, there were 32 Cuban defenders that were part of the President Maduro's military security, team and more than 150 wounded people. So that's the toll of this so-called U.S. surgical strike.
And while US media framed the operation as a lawful arrest, Venezuelan outlets called it an illegal abduction and military aggression. With two completely different versions circulating globally, what key truths about what happened have been buried or distorted in the international media coverage?
The most important one is the fact that for the first time in history, a sitting president has been kidnapped and taken forcibly to a U.S. prison. A lot of people talk about Noriega in Panama in the 80s, but when the U.S. kidnapped Noriega, he was not the sitting president. So the fact that Maduro is a sitting president of a country entitles him with something that is called personal immunity as head of state. And that's a principle of international relations that has been there for centuries and that no one have ever broke until now. So in that sense, that's basically the claim of Venezuela and the claim of international, law. I mean, the U.S. and many analysts, they don't not even have to be Chavista supporter of, anti-imperialist people, agree with that. I mean, the fact that the U.S. uses an excuse, a fabricated excuse, accusing President Maduro of being a narco trafficker or a mafia boss or whatever, is just an excuse to somehow legally support the fabrication in the U.S. and in the public opinion. But not even people even in the U.S. realize what is happening, and it was evident when President Trump gave his press conference after the strikes in Venezuela, when he mentioned oil 27 times in less than 50 minutes. So that when people noted that, people not only in Venezuela but from around the world realized for sure, there was certainty about the real causes of this operation against Venezuela, which is basically having access to Venezuela's natural resources, especially oil.
Donald Trump has claimed the US liberated Venezuela through this operation, but many Venezuelans describe fear, uncertainty, and a loss of sovereignty since Maduro's capture. From a Venezuelan perspective, does this look like liberation, occupation, or something else entirely?
Yes, it's an act of aggression. Basically, that's what it is. A new U.S. imperialist act of aggression against a sovereign country like Venezuela. And that act of aggression has translated, of course, into fear, into, anger and disgust for what the U.S. has done against our country. Many of us, including me, feel ourselves like violated. Not only that our country was violated, but we ourselves somehow feels personally violated by this U.S. aggression. But the fact is that Chavismo, the constitutional electoral authorities in Venezuela, are in power, remain in control of the situation. The U.S., of course, most analysts agree that the U.S. was expecting like a disruption in the, institutionality within Venezuela, but that didn't happen because Chavismo, the forces behind the constitutional authorities of Venezuela, is an extremely strong movement, and for that reason, the state rearranged itself extremely fast and in a very orderly fashion in order to keep the country running as it has been happening for the last several days, for the last more than 2 weeks after the strike. So the reality in Venezuela is that Chavismo is in control, that Venezuelan authorities are trying to keep the country united and we see that in the day-to-day life here in Caracas. When you look to the streets, when you go outside, you see complete normality. Of course, there's tension. There's still this sense of fear or the possibility of new strikes, and many analysts, including me, believe that we are still under the risk of further U.S. military attacks, because we believe that Chavismo, the elected authorities of Venezuela right now that are Chavistas, are trying, of course, to do this, juggling a diplomatic act in order to try to give some concessions to the U.S. while keeping the country safe, while avoiding new attacks from the U.S. But eventually, many of us believe that the anti-imperialist nature of Chavismo will crash with the U.S. and they will try again to get rid of, our elected authorities. So that's a real possibility. But the fact is that Chavismo is running the country. Chavismo has been showing an unprecedented, I haven't seen any country being invaded by the U.S., being attacked by the U.S. that have showed this level of cohesion that many people claim, especially in mainstream media, that did not exist because they tried to portray President Maduro as a dictator or someone hated by Venezuelan people. And the reality is that the majority of the Venezuelan people support Chavismo.
And after Maduro's removal, Delcy Rodriguez, his longtime deputy, was sworn in as acting president, promising resistance while also keeping diplomatic channels open. Is her leadership strengthening Venezuelan stability or simply maintaining the same political structure under new pressure?
Yes, it's somehow connected to what I said earlier. Basically, President Delcy Rodriguez, acting President Delcy Rodriguez, is in Venezuelan institutions are claiming that President Nicolás Maduro is still the president of Venezuela, and she was appointed as acting president until the return of President Maduro, and she has been doing her best to try to negotiate under duress, under threats. With the U.S. government, and at the same time showing inside Venezuela the unity and the cohesion of the Chavista forces that is more than evident. Civil and military leadership of Venezuela that is very clear that is united around acting President Delcy Rodriguez. So in my opinion, she's doing an amazing job. It should be, I don't want to be in her shoes, if you ask me, because she should be, dealing with a lot of tension, a lot of pressure. And of course, the Venezuelan government will try to give the U.S. some concessions because we don't want the country to be invaded or attacked again. And we don't want the state to be disintegrated, with a new U.S. military operation that might, destroy Venezuela or at least disrupt its, development. So in that sense, it's a complex time, the one that we are living these days. But Chavismo, as I told you before, is a solid entity, a massive entity that is ready and is prepared to deal with these challenges, and we hope that we will, successfully deal with them. A good example about who is running the show is showing the U.S. keep, seizing Venezuelan oil tankers in the Caribbean. It's a very clear example against this narrative coming from the U.S. that says that the U.S. and Washington is actually running Venezuela. Who would seize Venezuelan oil tankers if they control Venezuela? That's a very clear evidence that the ones running the show in Venezuela are the constitutionally elected authorities, Delcy Rodriguez and Chavismo.
Moving on from that, opposition figure Maria Corina Machado has delivered and received symbolic public support from US allies. yet she remains sidelined from actual power. Does this show that Venezuela's democratic opposition is being used for more international optics than real political change?
Yes. I mean, what we have seen in recent days is lame, is sad, looking at first, immediately after the U.S. invasion of Venezuela, President Trump himself clearly said that Maria Corina Machado didn't have enough internal support in Venezuela to lead a transition, so-called transition that is not seen here in the streets of Venezuela because we have constitutional tools to deal with situations like this. And that's what has been happening. And
Venezuela holds the world's largest proven oil reserves, and US officials have already discussed energy access and economic control after Maduro's capture. How much of this intervention is really about democracy and how much is about oil?
Yes, it's mostly about oil. I mean, and as I told you before, I mean, Trump, in less than 40 minutes talking in the press conference after the invasion of Venezuela, he mentioned oil 27 times. We haven't seen those, extrajudicial execution strikes in the Caribbean, killing poor fishermen that we don't know exactly if they were actually, carrying drugs, as the U.S. said. And we haven't seen those things again after the U.S. strike at Venezuela. And I bet that there are still a lot of drugs in the U.S. Circulating in the economy. So the reality is that the U.S. is after Venezuelan natural resources, mostly oil, of course. But beyond that, the reality is that, and that was clearly explained in this recently released National Security Strategy document released by the U.S., I believe that by the end of November, that basically says that the U.S. is trying to reclaim control of the continent, of what they call the hemisphere, the American continent.